It's been rad so far. It's been pretty good sitting in the corner with my heart going. Because I'm not, to kind of go to star signs, I'm a Capricorn, so we don't like being in public, and we're also not the happiest of chappies. But as I was about to say, that I've been called two things in my life within my job role that I kind of do. So I'm a curator half the time, and I work in futures the other side of the time. They both kind of influence each other in different ways. But I've been called a human demotivational poster before, and the Bernard Black of futures. So make of that what you will. So first, a brief history. So I've never, ever had to talk about myself on stage before because, one, I really fucking hate it. Two, I usually hide behind things like robots and VR, whatever subject we've been told to talk about. Most recently, it was sex toys. Talk to me about that later, it's pretty rad. This is a brief history of me. So when I was about 16, I was like, I really want to be called Dr. Natalie Kane. So much so that I registered for a Beats Advantage card when I was 16. I put Dr. Natalie Kane. I was like, this is aspirational, it's good. And then what ended up happening about 17 was I left home because my parents didn't want a Dr. Natalie Kane. They wanted something a little bit different, and I said, no, mate, I'm not going to move to France. I'm going to stay in England and try and hash it out by myself, which I did. As a result of that, because I was working two jobs and being a precocious 16-year-old, I royally fucked up my A-levels. So going from like a straight A student to like I think I got a BCD. There's a terrible picture of me in like a local newspaper. It's like, Natalie comes up through adversity. It's not good. So I ended up going through clearing, going to Portsmouth, and I went to university. So my idea of university initially was like, who's seen Dead Poets Society? So I thought the Dead Poets Society was like, everyone's sitting around reading books and just being like, do you know what, I've got this great idea. Oh, tell me, this is great. Wasn't like that. It was more like lots of people going to Tiger and then asking to borrow your notes at the end of the day. That was quite fun. So during that time, I had bloody awful depression because I think the whole sort of like expectation versus reality. So if any of you have seen that god-awful film 500 Days of Summer, there's a scene in it where it's like expectation versus reality. I was very much the reality, crying in a corner going, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And at that time, I came out as a queer lady, which was really fun because I was like, oh, shit, do you know what? Like, I think I like these people, but I also like these people. And I think this is fine. And that was good. And I just become a raging queer for a bit, which is good. And then I ended up graduating university and going to try a master's. But masters aren't very fun when you don't have any money and you try and do it by yourself. So I quit. And I was like, okay, fuck it. I'm going to move to Brighton instead. Because one, that's where all the queers are. Two, no offence. To the sea. And also, I moved there with someone else who I'm not with now, so that's fine. And I ended up... happens, come on, guys. And I ended up working in a call centre. So, Lauren, you know those charities that you work for now? Yeah. I was the people who went, hello, I'm calling on behalf of the Royal British Legion. Is that Brigadier Johnson? That was me who would phone up people and be like, can you give us £5 a month? And they'd be like, get a fucking proper job. And that was me for ages. And then I kind of went, what's all this art stuff about anyway? So I ended up volunteering at Fabrica, which is a cool venue that way, as kind of a workshop person and an exhibition producer person, not as a volunteer, and I really enjoyed it and I really loved it. And I ended up wandering into Lighthouse and volunteering there for a session. And this image here at the bottom, these were both projects that I've worked on. The first was one where I threaded up a couple of hundred shirts for Karina Kaikkonen, and then the one at the bottom was my first exhibition I ever produced, which is quite fun, which is Newsweek by Julian Oliver. But I'll kind of fast forward a little bit. This all happened in 2013, and I met these two people. So on the left is Honor Harger, who was previously artistic director at Lighthouse. So basically a friend of mine said, you need to go and have a drink with this person. I know you don't like talking to people, but you might as well try. So I did, and she was like, oh yeah, so you know how like art doesn't have to be about paintings, right? It can be about like politics and like society and the future and stuff. And she was stupid enough to give me a job at Lighthouse. Originally, I was at the illustrious title of storyteller and technologist. Best business card I've ever owned. And then on the right was Scott Smith, who in this picture is sitting with Frida Wiest, who's fucking rad. You should check her out. She's a visual social media person, but she studies it in a way that's like really intelligent and stuff. And Scott was a futurist, and I'd never met anyone who'd done futures before. And I remember seeing this talk at Lighthouse and being like, what the fuck is this? This is nonsense. But it's good nonsense, and I want to find out more. And I ended up kind of going to dinner with them afterwards because Anna was like, you have to talk to these people. This is what networking is. And I was like, so I ended up doing that. And then I didn't know what the fuck to talk to them about because I was just like, you've just said some really intelligent things about the future that I understand and I don't know what to talk to you about. So I ended up talking about dogs for about half an hour because everyone knows how to talk about dogs. But what meeting these two people was, because I'm still working with them both now because they took a chance on me, because I now work with Scott in a small futures consultancy called Changeist. I'll talk a bit more about them later. And they both made me realise how art can have a role in examining technology, society in the future in a way that makes it less scary and a bit more interesting and less about other stuff. So then I ended up being at FutureEverything in Manchester and moving 250 miles up north to go and become a curator. So this is a piece that we did in Singapore where we looked at how we could kind of get artists to come and explore the idea of how no one sleeps with technology. So we kind of ended up doing a thing for the 50th anniversary of Singapore about the smart city, that joyful thing. And ended up talking about how the fact that actually there is a need to kind of respond to this problem of like always on, always connected kind of problem. So we worked with Loop.ph, who are a fantastic artist group, who created this little like sanctuary in the middle of a shopping mall in Singapore. If anyone's been to Singapore, there are fucking loads of shopping malls. And it just people could sit and enjoy like their time together, which is quite nice. And that sounds really sappy, but it was really rad. And so that's kind of where I sit. Sort of like, oh, I've got a laser pointer. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. So there's this. So when I say design, it means it's more like me being a downer about design, but in a good way. And this is future. So what I'm going to talk about a bit more now is this little jazzy thing. It feels like it's from the future. That's rad. Because what the fuck is the future? Right, so I'm going to just wander over here. I've got a mic, haven't I? Hello. So this is what a lot of people think the future is like. This is Tom Cruise in Minority Report. This is not real. Secondly, this is, I'm really sorry, Sam. This is Mark Zuckerberg walking through a field of men with VR headsets on, which is one of my favourite photos of last year. Here is a concept for a flying car, and here is Pepper the robot having a selfie. And I've met Pepper. She's delightful. The problem is with this is we have this idea of what the future is supposed to be. The future is supposed to be this shiny, wonderful, chrome, man-filled land. Which is true, because if you like, there's a brilliant blog, which I'm sure Sam's probably heard of, which is called like Men in VR, which is basically just like reams of pictures of men going. It's like, no. It's like probably, it's just not, that's not, it's ridiculous, it's kind of boring. So futures is something that I got into because I kind of realised there's a massive problem with this idea of like shiny, happy futures and always being for a certain group of people. Now this is the futures cone. We're getting technical. So the futures cone is the way that kind of, again, this is a very quick Futures 101. This is the way that we kind of can look at the world in some ways. So, bloody brilliant. Sorry, laser pointer. So this is us now, today. This is here, we're here. You have the probable, which is things like the sun's probably going to rise tomorrow. We hope. Plausible is based on current knowledge, something that might possibly happen, as in like, Theresa May might decide she's had enough and might resign tomorrow, God willing. And then you have the possible, which is things that could be possible, but we're not entirely sure. We've got some knowledge about it, could possibly be there. So for instance, some sort of revolution. It's not a very good example. But and then you have things like wildcards. So wildcards are things that, based on old statistical data models, shouldn't happen, i.e. Trump was a wildcard. Because like if you saw all of the things that Nate Silver and various people put out, it was like 93% chance Hillary Clinton's going to get it. And then you have lots of crying people in the morning, like me. My partner woke me up and said, just go back to sleep. Don't do it. So this bit here is the preferable bit. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So the preferable bit is basically the shiny, happy, white, clean future where nothing breaks and everything's wonderful. Something like this. Lovely white linen, and there's a home gateway which lets you into your house. And she wakes up without a horrible alarm because somehow she's figured out that everything's fine. And she picks up something from her fridge, and it's all like lovely calories, and there's no like takeaway in there or anything. She's running, and like her heart rate works. It's fine. She's a nice woman. Yeah, like she just spends all the time in the kitchen worrying about her calorie content. That's basically it. It basically goes on like this forever. Because Oh, I've ruined the surprise. There we go. It goes on as forever because the whole idea is like with those. That's a product vision video of Samsung from last year. There are reams of product vision videos of people kind of going, "Oh, look at the future you could have," except that's not how it works. Like the future doesn't work like that. The future is messy and broken and wobbles and affects people. For instance, this. And who's seen this? Cloud Pets. Oh Christ. Cloud Pets is a toy that listens to you. The problems with this, it was a toy that was given to children, a lot like Hello Barbie, which was quite a similar thing, that it collects the, basically you can upload stories and things for your child to talk to, but what ended up happening was because all the data is kept on a third-party server and is really vulnerable, that the personal details of many children and families was leaked online. A toy shouldn't do this. Like, this is not like the shiny, happy future. Like, a toy, like kids, for instance, talk to toys before they talk to their parents about really difficult subjects. Imagine if your freaking panda, blurted out stuff that you didn't want it to. But it's more sinister than that, because basically it's doing things we didn't expect things to do, but they are doing it. So this is kind of what I do as Futures, is to kind of think about what is that friction between the expectation and reality. Where do our visions of the future like this actually conflict? So this is a concept sketch of the future of Shenzhen. Now, if anyone's been to Shenzhen, you'll realise that it doesn't look like this. It looks like this. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Just because we have concept sketches like this doesn't mean that it's dealing with the problems that are there. You can't just put a stack of trees like in there and hope everything will be sorted, because the problem is it's so much more messy than that. It's not about technology. It's about behaviours and the way people understand how things kind of happen in the future and all of their aspirations that are there. And it's not going to be like this. Come on. So this is the preview belt. This actually existed for a short amount of time until people knew it was a fucking terrible idea. So the idea is it's for 4 minutes. You can only do it for 4 minutes because it's dangerous, apparently, or something. The man can see an ultrasound of the baby so that he can bond better with it, and like because there aren't other ways for you to do that. And also, like, why is this a priority? Because actually, the future isn't going to look like this if we don't stop stuff like this, which privileges a small amount of people, and actually doesn't deal with the real problems there are with pregnancy and the real problems there are with postnatal care or prenatal care, because it's going to end up being like this. So this is from Children of Men, which is a horrible film. But it's a really interesting way of kind of showing here is a dystopian future which is bred from a utopian one. But what ends up happening was actually the women who are affected are kind of the kind of black women or trans women or sex workers or people who don't get this privileged window into the future. They end up being the ones who live in this horrible society because we thought, oh, hang on, we're going to just privilege the people who, we're going to imagine futures that are like, it's fine, they're clean and they're flat packed and they're easy to maintain, but they don't understand all of the ethical issues there are around, all the social issues there are around that. Because your utopia might be someone else's dystopia, which is what Madeline Ashby, a fantastic science fiction author and colleague, said. It might be the things that you think are brilliant end up being kind of negatively affecting someone else. And that's me with my other two members of Changeist in a catacomb in Malta, because we do goth shit on our holidays. So one of the I'm going to quickly kind of feed you through some projects that I work on very quickly before I leave you all be. So Thing Clash is something that I do as part of Changeist, and it's looking at the cross implications of the Internet of Things. So basically kind of talking to people and kind of going, okay, so this object, this smart monitor, or this wearable, or this thing that you think is great, okay, let's see what happens if you cross it across women and refugees, single mothers, high-status people, homeless people, and see what it affects. Because the problem is, it's not often like the wearer that has the problem. It's not a case of like, okay, so you wearing something or having something in your house is something you have to be worried about. It's all those secondary consequences, because people who aren't even within like arm's length of touching those things still are affected by it. And that's the things that I'm kind of interested in getting people to think about. It's moving across contexts and people and that kind of thing. And then I teach as well, because teaching's fucking rad but exhausting in a good way, because I end up working with really interesting people from, I've run workshops to sort of top 3 technology companies to advocacy groups. So in the bottom right-hand corner is the Malta EU presidency folk, which is a bunch of sort of NGOs and people who are thinking about how they can think about the future in different ways through the Valletta 2018 City of Culture. On the top right-hand corner is an exhibition I did with a bunch of students in Singapore about where the smart city might cause problems. So, for instance, you have this wrist bracelet that one of them made up, which is basically buzzed when you picked up an apple that had plastic kind of covering, had been flown in from miles away, to make you think directly about the kind of bodily impact of climate change, because all of these things being flown in for no reason when you could just have a locally sourced, slightly rough around the edges apple. And we end up doing sort of courses, this is Barcelona in the corner, which help people understand the future and think about the future in different ways. So it's not a case of, I want to make the coolest, nearest thing that's going to sell millions and change the lives. I mean, that's great, but it's more a case of thinking about what it is when you put something out into the world and having responsibility over it and for the effect it's going to have, so you don't end up having horrible, alien pregnancy belts. And then the last project I work on is haunted machines. I fucking love ghosts. I love anything weird, anything just remotely paranormal. It's great. So Haunted Machines is a project that I do with Tobias Revel, which is looks at the proliferation, or basically, why do we keep talking about technology in terms of magic, and what does it do to our sense of power and control over it? So when we say it just works, or it's magic, where are we actually giving away stuff that we maybe don't want to give away? And that's why you have haunted pandas in children's bedrooms. So I was told to give 5 top tips, but I'm not very good at giving tips, because I don't think anyone should really take much of my advice to heart, because I'm the kind of person who just doesn't listen to anyone and just gets drunk. And I didn't have dinner today. Do you want to listen to so these are the things that I can really give you. So based on that slide I gave you earlier about where I kind of came to this point, was a big sort of lesson in learning resilience. So understanding what resilience means and how you break things to kind of figure out what the new form of them are. And anticipating change and looking at the fact that things aren't always going to be the way you think they're going to be, but also kind of actively looking about the fact that things have changed. Nothing is a certainty. I mean, you have to expect uncertainty. Uncertainty is something that happens whether you like it or not. It's a thing that will constantly be looking you in the face when you're trying to make a decision. And that is fine. It's okay for uncertainty to exist because it's exciting, but it's also a means for you to be responsible and accountable for the things that you do. It's a great space to work in. And one of the things is reassessing assumptions. So the things that you put out into the world, understanding what people might think about them and where they might be used or broken apart or abused. So things like, God, I'm thinking I've got loads of examples, but they're all horrible. Things like the Shady Neighbourhood app, which is a study I did quite recently, where the Shady Neighbourhood apps is a group of apps. Basically, they're kind of run by panicked white people to kind of go so we made this app so that you can figure out the safest place for you to walk in your neighbourhood where there won't be any robberies or anything. Basically what happens, it targets black areas. It basically racially profiles areas by saying, this woman was talking in really loud voice and in a language I didn't really understand, but it's she's probably just speaking roadman, if anyone knows what, which is basically London accent. And then not understanding that, and then having these horrible reports of these areas ending up being profiled as a result. But ultimately using imagination, and that's kind of what I love about futures, is that with futures you can really understand, okay, so it might not definitely happen, but it could happen, and by figuring out what that future might look like, you can pace back and go, okay, so where do things need to change from now for them to be better in the future? Because we deserve better than crappy plastic futures that are going to end up in a pile of, in the middle of nowhere on a floating land heap like bloody Waterworld. But it's we deserve better, as Lauren said. It's always a case of looking for better. There's a better way of looking at it. So thanks, and that's why I basically was called a human motivational poster, because I walk into rooms with white men who are do you know what's really great? AI is the new big thing. Is is it though? Is it? It's more there's a mountain just being this will all be burning one day. It's good. So thanks guys. Yeah, it's amazing.